Have you ever filled out a questionnaire on the food service in the school's cafeteria or on a theme for a school dance? If so, you were responding to a poll. Polling, surveying a population of an issue, is the most reliable way of determining what the public thinks. In this case, the pollsters at your school hope to find out what you and other students thought about the cafeteria food or the dance. In a similar way, pollsters around the country survey people about their opinions on such things as presidential candidates and government policies. Polling. The origins of polling. George Gallup, the founder of modern political polling. While working on his doctoral degree, Gallup became convinced that the survey methods that newspapers and other organizations were using were inaccurate. Many of the polling questions being asked were open-ended, failing to probe residents for specific detailed answers. For example, one poll might ask respondents which sections of the newspaper they read. Some people, embarrassed to admit that they would only read the comics and not the editorial page, would answer falsely. Gallup developed a polling method that involved, in this instance, going through each section of the newspaper to determine which sections interested the respondent. In this way, the respondent could express interest in each section separately. Gallup gained fame in 1936 by attacking the presidential poll that a weekly magazine called the Literary Digest had conducted in 1916. The magazine polled voters by mailing out millions of ballots to people whose names had been gathered from lists of automobile and telephone owners. In 1936, the Digest predicted that Republican Alfred M. Landon would win over Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt. Gallup claimed that the methods used in Digest poll were flawed and that the poll was unrepresentative of all voters. He made this determination because he lists on which the poll was based did not include low-income voters, who at the time were less likely to have cars or telephones. Gallup then declared that his own poll would produce more accurate results. The Literary Digest poll was in fact flawed, and just for the reason that Gallup had mentioned. The Digest's faulty prediction became perhaps the most famous polling blooper ever, for Roosevelt won the greatest landslide victory in U.S. history. With the success of his 1936 presidential poll, Gallup launched a career in the pioneering of modern polling. Gallup had better results than other pollsters because he used a more scientific method of polling. That is, he polled a group of people who better represented the U.S. population as a whole. Gallup's success firmly established statistical sampling methods in public polling. This kind of scientific polling has become increasingly complex and more accurate as pollsters have developed better techniques. Types of polls. The most common types of polls are in-person interviews, telephone interviews, and mail questionnaires. In-person interviews were common in the early days of polling and are still used by few organizations today, such as the one founded by Gallup himself. Most polling organizations, however, have abandoned in-person interviews for telephone interviews, which are quicker and less expensive. Mail questionnaires have also been popular for many years. Some early mail questionnaires used straw ballots, which people could clip out of the newspaper, fill out, and drop in the mail. Mail polls are inexpensive and allow more questions, but generally fewer people respond to them. In some cases, however, researchers who have been carefully selected the population they will be polling have used them with much success. In 1967, CBS pioneered another technique, the exit poll. An exit poll surveys a fraction of voters in randomly selected voting precincts after they have cast their ballots. This allows pollsters to discover how people actually voted without waiting for the official votes to be counted. The use of exit polls has been criticized. In 1980, a television network using exit poll results declared Ronald Reagan the winner of the presidential election while people on the West Coast were still voting. After that election, networks agreed not to release actual poll numbers for a state until voting ended in that state. However, networks still had access to the numbers before their release. Based on exit polls taken during the 2000 presidential election, networks incorrectly predicted who Florida voters would choose, twice. After the 2000 election, some in the media have predicted the demise of the exit poll. Conducting polls. If pollsters are to gain reliable results from a poll, they must follow certain guidelines. Getting accurate results depends on how people are chosen to participate in the poll, the type of poll that is used, proper question wording and order, and how familiar the public is with the issue. Sampling. Modern public opinion polls depend heavily on accurate sampling, or the choosing of a group of people to participate in a poll. To get a poll result that accurately reflects the total population's opinion, participants must be chosen at random. Good polling relies on the randomness of the sample much more than its size. In 1936, Literary Digest poll, for example, had a sample of more than 2 million but came up with inaccurate results because the sample was not random. Many national polls try to determine their opinions of over 200 million potential voters by questioning only 1,500 respondents. Some people doubt the validity of such polls. Indeed, when Americans once were polled about whether national polls with 1,500 respondents could be accurate, only 28% thought they could be, while 56% said that they could not be. Hundreds of election polls have proved, however, that such a sample size can indeed give accurate results. As one political scientist points out, cooks test soups by sampling only one spoonful from a large pot, and doctors test blood by drawing a single drop from a whole body. Mathematical proofs have demonstrated that a small random sample can accurately represent the opinions of hundreds of millions of people. A sample cannot, however, reveal the certainty with the exact distribution of opinion in response to a question would have been if everyone in the population had been surveyed. Instead, it was just a sample. The uncertainty that sampling introduces is called sampling error. The likely size of possible error, which can be determined through statistics, is expressed as a percentage above or below a poll's result. For example, a poll might find that candidate A leads candidate B by 55% of the vote to 45%. If the sampling error were 5 points, however, a candidate A might get between 50 to 60% of the vote, while candidate B might get 40 to 50%. Question wording. The wording of a poll's question can also lead to inaccurate results. Questions that make a one-sided statement and ask poll respondents to agree or disagree with it tend to get biased results. For example, suppose someone in your school conducts a poll worded in this way: all students should be allowed to go off campus for lunch. Do you agree or disagree? Because of how the statement is phrased, most students being polled would probably agree. Now consider this wording. Some students believe that the school day should start 30 minutes earlier so that there would be an extra time to leave campus for lunch. Other students believe that the school should keep the shorter day and continue to hold lunch in the cafeteria. Which belief comes closer to your opinion? Even though both questions are asking about the same situation, your answer to the second one might be different because it presents more information. Certain words can also affect results. For example, in a poll about how to cut government budgets, only 8% of respondents identified aid to the needy as an area for cuts. When the poll referred to the budget area as public welfare programs, however, 39% supported cuts. Why the change? The two terms bring up very different images in respondents' mind. Aid to the needy calls a picture of a human suffering. In contrast, public welfare has become negatively associated with people who take advantage of government welfare programs. Keep wording's effect on responses in mind when analyzing poll results. Those who wish to use poll results to advance a particular viewpoint can manipulate question wording to create inaccurate results. Question order. Just as different ways of wording a question can affect a poll's response, so can the order of which questions are asked. Even if the wording is unchanged, the earlier questions in a poll may lead a person to see an issue in a certain way, thus possibly affecting how they answer later questions. Think about the following situation. A pollster is conducting a poll during a presidential election year. The economy is in a slump. The order of the pollster's questions is as follows. 1. How well do you think the country is doing these days? 2. What do you think of President Pat Hartley's economic policies? 3. Are you going to vote for President Hartley in the election? The pollster's questions remind the respondent that the country is in economical slump and suggest that President Hartley might be somehow responsible. The respondent thus is more likely to have a negative response to the question about voting for President Hartley. When a poll is held, also can affect results. Public opinion often can change dramatically, particularly on new issues. Early polls on such issues often are poor predictors because people have not yet developed strong opinions. For example, polls sometimes are conducted very early during a presidential race. These polls may give a misleading impression of how people will actually vote. After all, as the events unfold, people find out more information. Their opinions about candidates often change. As a result, you should be cautious about results of early polls.